Hi, it's Todd, and today I'm here to talk about Lamentations of the Flame Princess. Uh, I'm not here to talk about all the stuff around Lamentations of the Flame Princess, the authors, or even their modules. I'm really just going to be taking a look at the rules because I think getting away from a lot of the politics and a lot of the strong feelings about their various materials and about stuff that the authors have said or the way they like to play their games, take all that aside. And the actual rules is a very solid retro clone with their own spin on Basic Expert. And if you listened or watched my videos on Basic Expert, I talked about a little bit how it's become sort of the base document for a lot of OSR games that have since come, or, old school Renaissance, however you want to pronounce it. Basically, new versions of rules that either just wholeheartedly copy the old rules and just kind of clone them for use, because a lot of times the original rules are hard to get, or use them as a base to then make their own changes. Uh, Lamentations is one of these, and I think it's actually a very good one. And it might even be a little bit counterintuitive when you look at the cover graphic art and you look that it's 18 plus explicit content warning, that it would just be a very solid basic rule set. But it is. So let's take a look inside. Now, I just want to cover the 18 plus content right up front. It really comes down to there's a few images here in the middle of the book. I'm just going to flip through them. This is pretty much the entirety of the really sort of adult oriented material. A couple of these black and white ones. That's basically it. If you were to take those out of the book, and maybe there's one or more that I'm missing, I think there's a couple of these combat shots, or maybe a little graphic. Okay, sword through the eye, sort of business. But ultimately, take away those middle graphics aside, and the rules are very straightforward and very not very controversial, not really adult oriented at all. But they're there, and it's certainly, those graphics are really the only thing, almost the only thing in these rules that kind of set the tone for a lot of the very weird, strange sort of sword and sorcery sort of adult themes that a lot of their settings have. But once you get inside, you'll see that it gives you a little bit on character creation, and that you get into kind of the race as class, which is basically straight out of Basic Expert. Again, though, with some little twists, which I think are fairly good. The main one is that there's no thief class in here. Instead, they have something they call the specialist. The specialist, essentially, instead of giving you thief skills, so they did a couple of things. Well, maybe I'll go over this really quick. In Basic Expert, in Greyhawk, the thieves' skills were rolled on sort of a percentile system, which is different than basically how you'd roll anything else in the game. Everything else might be an X and 6. You have a 1 in 6, a 2 in 6 chance of doing something you roll. Thief skills will be, 80% out of 100, that sort of thing. With the specialist class, what they've done is they basically brought it back to fit in with the rest of the kind of way you would roll some kind of skill or ability. So now they're back to being sort of some number in 6 chance. And they give you a bunch of different things to do. It doesn't have to just be thief skills, So in here, it could be architecture. If you're a dungeon delver, being able to notice things about the architecture could be super important. Bushcraft, which is sort of like a survival skill, kind of rangery, druidy, if you'd like. It could be being able to sort of find directions, hunt and forage for food, kind of anything out in the wilderness. There you have bushcraft, and then you have kind of climbing. You have searching, sleight of hand. So those are your kind of thief skills. Sneak attack, again, kind of the classic thief skill. Stealthing, also tinkers, about traps, and then, languages if you want to have special knowledge of languages. So within this class, they basically decided to make it sort of a catch-all for any kind of skill monkey sort of skilled class that you want to make. So it doesn't have to be a classic thief. It could be more like a ranger. It could be more like a MacGyver type if you want to. So it's very versatile, and it's a nice change, and I think it gives It gives someone who wants to play, someone with skills, but maybe doesn't want to be a thief, some different options, right? If none of the other classes kind of suit you, you have this kind of image in your head, you could probably find it in the specialists class. Before I forget, one thing I do want to note is it says on the cover of the book, there we go, rules for players core book, rules and magic. And it's very important if you're looking at your local game shop or you're looking at online. This book is not a complete rule set to run the game with. You cannot have a gaming group, buy this one book, and then sit down and run. This book only has player-facing information. So, yes, it's got sort of the core rules for how the game works. It has your spells. It tells you how combat works. But that's it. There is nothing Dungeon Master referee facing at all. It doesn't give you any guidance on monsters or how to run monsters or how to build encounters or how to run dungeons or build dungeons. It has none of that at all. Everything in here is basically for the players and the core mechanics of how the game works. So keep that in mind, because I think when I first got this set, I must have ignored seeing that, and it's easy to miss. It's not exactly a giant graphic. And I don't know if anywhere in the book it says that explicitly, except for here. It might. Certainly, if you flip through it, you'll notice that there are no rules for monsters or rules for encounters or dungeons or anything like that. But if you overlook it and you take it home, or you take it, right to your gaming group, you're going to find it wanting as far as being a single resource for both players and the referee. For players, it's totally complete. For the referee, it's not. I think, or I know there used to be some kind of referee Dungeon Master guide that they had. I think it may still be available digitally. I'm not sure if it used to be in print. It's not anymore. I've heard that there's some new version in the works. It's not there right now, so you're going to have to rely on other materials. Now, that said, there are tons of other materials, right? So anything that works with Basic Expert or really 0 through probably even 2nd edition D&D, you can fold into this with little trouble if there's anything that you like. Any rules that you want to use, kind of any of the encounter building advice or tables, you can pretty much use them straight away. They do make some changes in here to how armor class is done and a few other things, so you'll want to check those. You may need to do some slight conversions or not, because a lot of it's not necessarily a large enough dilemma where you can't just kind of run it straight and just live with the fact that maybe it's not optimized for the system. Nobody's going to know. But you can do that. And they also have plenty of settings and materials that are written for Lamentations. And I thought maybe that, the reason why they did this is because there was this expectation that you might buy this along with something like Blood in the Chocolate or Broodmother Sky Fortress or Red and Pleasant Land, I think it's called, or any of their Carcosa, and you would run it with, or not Carcosa, I'm sorry, or maybe that's one too. Vornheim, I know, is another one. And that you would run it with one of those sort of settings, kind of campaign books. I'm pretty sure that if you had this in conjunction with one of those books, that those books would have the things that you would need to run. Now, I'm not positive because I have not run those, but I do use these rules for my play-by-post campaign that I run, and I've just supplemented with essentially Basic Expert or anything else from, like I said, 0 through 2nd edition. I'm usually 0 through 1st, but I think with maybe a couple extra tweaks, 2nd edition will fit right in there as well. Any of the materials, it will play fine. As far as changes from kind of maybe just vanilla Basic Experts besides the Specialist class, one thing I thought was interesting is that I think it's interesting, and I'll just cover this a little bit. It's always interesting how different clones, different reimaginings of these rules want to look at sort of the fighter class, because the fighter class is always the least, not least powerful, but has the least options for things to do. So, and I hope you didn't hear that car hammering the horn outside the window. See how that works. It has the least amount of interesting things to do in the sense of what are your options, right? Because a fighter is really good at thwacking stuff, and that's basically it. And particularly in the older games, they don't get lots of moves, they don't get lots of abilities. It's just thwack. Which is not like, say, a magic user gets all kinds of spells, or a cleric that gets turning and they get some spells, or like we just looked at the specialist. The specialist has all these different things that it can kind of pull out at any given opportunity. A fighter doesn't have much with that. It's really just, here's the class that's good at combat. And it's interesting to see what different designers look at when they think about how they maybe want to treat the fighter. Do they want to keep it just a combat class? Do they want to try to give it other areas of expertise, or at least give it some other things it can do outside of combat? How do they want to protect that niche, that combat niche that it has, if at all? And one of the things the thing I guess that Lamentations does, or I guess there's a couple, is one of them is that, unlike in, say, Basic Expert, only fighters have an attack bonus that increases after first level. So if you were anything but a fighter, your attack bonus caps out at +1. You're never going to get better at it. So that puts a real, sort of limit on how much better you can get at combat, because +1, that's it. Maybe you'll get some magic weapons that'll bump you up a little bit. They put in some combat maneuvers you can use. If you're using missile weapons, you can spend a turn to aim and you can get a bonus there. There's a couple of other maybe maneuvers you can try, but basically that's it, +1. Fighters will keep going. And so that's a nice touch. My party, as far as in my play-by-post campaign, is still low level. So it'll be interesting to see how this actually works in play if they get into sort of the mid to high levels, where the fighter really starts to break away from the pack as far as their combat prowess. Because monsters are going to become hard to hit. If you only have +1 at a certain rate, you're going to be looking at, you're going to need higher and higher rolls to hit as the monsters get tougher, or you're fighting, armored humanoids, or you're fighting monsters with thicker armor, better AC. They're going to become more difficult, and you are not going to scale to meet up with them. The fighter will essentially scale with the monsters, assuming that their armor class goes up. And even if it doesn't, you're capping out your non-special ability DPS. Essentially, you're capping it, and that has a that should help differentiate the fighter from, say, the dwarf and the elf, which, in Basic Expert, really the only reasons why you would maybe want to pick a fighter over a dwarf or an elf is because you have very good stats. There was something that I forget where it was mentioned, but there's a quote somewhere from one of the designers about the whole racist class, and they were saying, hey, you pick the racist class when your stats are kind of don't work, when they're not very good, because then chances are your survivability is not that great. So take all the advantages that you have with the demi-human racist classes right up front, and you can live with the fact that you'll advance more slowly because your survivability wasn't that great to begin with. So take the dwarven or elven bonuses. But one thing with those dwarves and elves is a dwarf is fighter-like and can do a lot of things fighters can do, but they don't get that bonus, right? Only fighters. And it says so specifically. In other places, it'll say fighter types, and they'll throw in elves and dwarves, because essentially dwarves are essentially fighters. Elves are essentially half fighters. But, they're very specific. The fighter and only the fighter, gets higher attack bonus. So that's an important distinction for the fighter. Other than that, one of the things that Lamentations gives you is it gives you rules for playing sort of a slightly different era of the Middle Ages or of medieval. And it goes for sort of a later medieval sort of colonial Renaissance feel. So you'll see in the back of the book, they have rules for firearms, where you can have firearms in your campaign if you'd like. When you see their rules for travel, you can see that the kind of ships they use are clearly sort of, Renaissance era ships more than, classic medieval style ships. So that kind of gives you a different feel. It gives you rules if you're looking for rules to add firearms to your campaign, either because you're going for something maybe more steampunkish, or you just like to throw in a gun here and there. They've got you covered with that. There's also a big emphasis on retainers, right? Hirelings. And I did a whole video, small one, on hirelings, and this gives you a lot of information, all kinds of different types of hirelings, you know, what they do, how to keep them, and again, property. And this is key because it's something that if you were to read the settings that come out with Lamentations, you maybe read about it and then think about what it is, you would get a very different feeling than if I took out all the stuff that would kind of identify this as Lamentations of the Flame Princess and just have you read the rules. You would see a lot of stuff on retainers. You would see a lot of stuff on travel, a lot of stuff on property and finance, which again, I think goes into that sort of late medieval Renaissance colonial feel where it's, the East India Company, and again, classic D&D is all about finding loot. And this has that same kind of focus on making money, what to do with that money. One of the things you do is you hire staff, either staff to work for you and wherever your home base is, and then staff who may come with you. And then what are you doing? You're investing, right? You're investing in property. You're investing in land. So it's got the classic sort of domain management stuff. It's got the classic, you could hire your own army if you can afford to, and you can staff your castle with butlers and physicians, and you can craftsmen, and you can buy ships and hire sailors and captains and sail out in search of adventure. And that's a lot of sort of flavor that you don't necessarily get, or gets buried behind some of the weirder stuff. But just as far as sort of a vanilla, again, take away the kind of settings, don't think about whatever other baggage that comes with the branding. It's a really solid set of rules for handling those things. Very well written. I think that I haven't really had many complaints from players as far as not being able to understand everything. I think it lays it out very well. It gives you pretty much everything you need. I think the one thing is while a lot of rules will have information like this, I think you can see the way the book is laid out that it kind of spotlights it. It puts a focus on there. This is not just a part of a chapter on equipment where at the back of the equipment section they have, you can hire some guys. It's given its own chapter, which tells you that they feel like this is important. See this big mark. This is something, pay attention to this. The same with encounters at sea and things, maritime adventures, bam, it's got its own section. This is important. Pay attention to this. It's not just a little extra. And even though, the section on finance is basically one page or 2 pages, I think, right? Maybe one page back to back. Again, it's given its own sort of chapter heading. They're telling you these things are kind of important. And these are the sorts of things that I always appreciate about the classic game, are these sort of economic, sort of late level, late game kind of fun stuff where you have your own ships and you have your own crew and you're trying to manage it and you have your own estate, and that's maybe giving you money, but then you also have to take care of it. And they're great hooks for further adventuring, and they're great ways for your characters to sort of plant their roots in a setting, and call it home. And then if you're having multiple generations, then suddenly, your first character now becomes sort of the benefactor of your next character, that sort of thing. So it lays it all out, which is nice. Combat is pretty straightforward. Again, this is all written from the player's point of view. So there's really nothing in here about how to run your monsters. I think it might mention morale in here, which is nice. And then reactions. So it definitely does have stuff that is meaningful as a referee, but it's not particularly have anything in here about specific monster only moves or referee moves or how to do this or that from a monster's point of view. Another couple of interesting things, it sort of lays out, one of the other things I like about these rules is it lays out some attack options that either I've always thought of as just making sense, so I've kind of house ruled them in, or they were maybe kind of buried in parts of the book. It kind of brings it to the forefront. It also, again, puts it as stuff that only fighters and fighter types can do. So they give you kind of a press attack, which I think if you're used to the post 3.5 version of the game, I think, would be that, they call it power attack. They have the same thing. Basically, you give up defense to give offense. You can also reverse that and give up offense to get defense. But I think only fighters and fighter types can do that. It talks about, casting spells in combat, talks about firing missile weapons in combat. And I think, again, one of the things that it does is differently from basic expert. And I could be wrong about this because sometimes the editions get mixed up in my head. I believe either in basically white box or in white box and in basic expert, you simply cannot fire missile weapons into melee. Once melee starts, whoever's in melee is basically locked out of having missile weapons fired at them. Which I don't generally like, because I don't like when the rules just say no. Now, there's a good reason to say, in a sense, common sense, where you wouldn't do that. And maybe that's where they're going with it. That, look, in any realistic situation, you're not going to fire an arrow into two guys locked in close quarters combat because you have no idea who you're going to hit. But maybe you want to take that chance. Maybe you're desperate enough to want to take that chance. And I feel like if you want to take that chance, we should try to mechanically figure out what's a reasonable way to adjudicate the fact that you have no idea who you're going to hit, but you might hit somebody, and you're okay to take the risk of hitting your friend because you might hit the enemy. And they have sort of that mechanic that they put in here, firing into melee. I think it's pretty slick. I don't know if slick's the right word. It makes sense. Basically what you do is, before you even roll the attack, though it doesn't really matter, you can roll the attack first. Essentially, you're going to roll a die, and you're going to assign basically equal probability to every person that's in the melee. So imagine you're trying to shoot an owlbear, and the owlbear's in combat with 3 of your friends. So you would basically say each one of your friends and the owlbear represent a 2 out of 6, right? So 1 to 2 is your first friend, 2 to 4 is your 3 to 4 is your second friend, 5 to 6 is the owlbear. And you roll that 6-sided die, and whichever number that hits, that rolls along with your attack value, that's who it's going to hit. So you may be aiming at the owlbear, you roll a 1, you're going to hit your first friend if you roll well. Very easy. But they add another wrinkle to that, which I also like, which is they have the aiming mechanic. Now, the aiming mechanic means, and this may be in Basic Expert too, I can't remember. I just tend to throw everything together that I like, so sometimes I will forget what comes from what. You just take a round to aim. And if you take a round to aim, it gives you +4, which is nice. And again, going back to what we were talking about, the fact that if you're not a fighter, your ability to increase your to hit bonus basically ends right after first or second level. Being able to get bonuses from different things is going to be super important. So if you can get +4, that's huge, right? Particularly at low levels. I mean, really in any level, because that +4, nothing is scaling for you. Your to hit value. So that +4 is going to be huge. Now you have to give up a round to do it. So that's a real gamble in the sense of, do you give up one whole round of doing anything, and you can do nothing else but aim. You can't move. That's it. You are dropping to a knee, or however you want to see in the fiction. You are stopping. You are aiming, and if anything happens to you, whatever, it's broken. So you give up a lot to aim, but you can aim, and they could have just left it at +4, fine. But they also made the synergy with that firing into melee. So if you aim and you fire into melee, now whoever your target now will count as 2 people instead of 1. Or, instead of counting equally with the other participants, they will kind of have an extra pip in the hole, so to speak. So if it was 50-50, if you were firing into a melee, and you had one friend fighting the owlbear, and you aim and fire at the owlbear, instead of it being a 50-50 chance that the owlbear or your friend will get hit, it becomes a 33% chance for your friend, 66% chance essentially for the owlbear. So they will count as 2 people, participants in the melee instead of 1. So there's still chances you could hit your friend, and at +4, if you do hit your friend, you have a much better chance of hitting something, right? That +4 means that you're going to hit something more likely than nothing, and it might be your friend, but chances are at least a little bit more in your favor of hitting the target. Now, obviously, if you have a whole scrum in there, if you have 4 or 5 combatants all mixed in there, the odds are going to be low, but that's kind of how it should be, because really you want to be dissuaded from firing into melee. I think that's the key. You want to be dissuaded from doing it, but you want to have the option to still do it. So I much prefer this than just saying outright you cannot, say, okay, we're going to stack the deck against you, but we're going to let you sort of, you can fight the odds, you can take a chance, you can roll the dice, and either it'll be great or it'll be awful, or or it could be nothing. You could just miss altogether. A lot of times, my players, they aim and they'll fire into melee, and they just roll so poorly that they hit nothing anyway. So it becomes irrelevant, and they don't, the risk is not realized. But I think it's a great way for handling situations like that, because I'm all about pushing your luck. As a player, I want to be able to push my luck. I want to be able to take a chance. I'd rather the game let me take a chance, even if it's against my best interest or against the interest of the team. Let me take a chance as opposed to not. And that's a great example of having kind of a mechanic to press your luck, to try to see if you can make something happen out of nothing or out of a dire circumstance. Because what's the alternative? If your friend's locked into melee combat, either you join them, and maybe you can, maybe you can't, maybe there's no room for you in this mix, or maybe you get stuck doing nothing. So this gives you a way of doing something where maybe there might not be anything else for you to do. Other than that, that's pretty much a wrap. I probably want to touch on one other thing. They have their own spells. Some of them are their own kind of interesting versions. And of the spells, this is probably where more of the weirdness kind of creeps in. But I think, the one that is the most fun, and definitely in a weird, strange way, is summon. And they don't just do summon in sort of the normal way that you may be used to from, other Dungeons and Dragons versions or other things, where essentially you're picking from a list and maybe you randomly see which thing you get, but basically it's from a prescribed list. Summon actually is, you have to follow. The one thing is, and thankfully there are apps to do it, because if you look here, there's about 3 pages worth of summon, all these tables. But basically you're going to randomly generate a creature on the fly, and that's what you summon. And that's pretty cool. And it definitely fits in with the sort of strange sword and sorcery kind of weird, weird fantasy vibe, because you're going to get all kinds of strange results through these rolls, and then it will appear on the scene. It's only a first level spell, so it can be immensely powerful. It can also backfire very poorly. One, you might get a creature that basically has nothing good to do. You're not guaranteed to get a creature with lots of massively wonderful abilities that you can bring to bear. You might get something that's more or less useless or weak. And again, it has sort of a press your luck mechanic where you can try to summon, stronger creatures, or you can try to summon weaker creatures. Obviously, try to summon something stronger. You have a better chance of getting something that's going to be useful. At the same time, those stronger creatures have a better chance of turning on you, either appearing and being out of your control entirely, or even dominating you when they, pierce the veil between worlds and arrive in the realm. So there's a lot of risk reward mixed in here, and it's always fun. The caster in my group, it's always that thing of last resort. It's like, I don't know what's going to happen. It might kill us all. It's sort of like, you don't know what's going to happen, so you pull the pin on the grenade, and you kind of, if we're all going down, we're going to go down together kind of thing, because you don't know. He mostly casts it and then tells everybody to run, because it's that sort of volatile. But it definitely adds something, fun into the mix. It adds, a real injection of weirdness and things. It definitely has that kind of creepy sorcerer vibe, that sort of, I don't know, kind of Cthulhu-esque, what are we calling out from the dark recesses of the universe sort of thing. And I think that as a creature creator, you could use this outside the spell just to make weird creatures if you need to. It's totally serviceable for that, and you definitely get a lot of strange, amazing things that will pop out of the woodwork. Floating things with tentacles and many eyes that can do this or that, or any kind of creepy thing you can think of. I think like I said, you can read through the tables and kind of get a sense. But it could be, like a kind of an amoeba form, or it's like a slime, or just, I think here's one definitely right out of Lovecraft, flowing colors. I mean, the abyss is open for business, and you can get what you can get. And it's a lot of fun. And the fact that they don't necessarily have control over it is sort of a balancing factor. And they don't tend to last very long. You can get lucky and you can have them almost like charm works, where they can be your servants for a long period of time, but it's not guaranteed. And if you don't take the chance and do something strong, maybe you get a kind of a servant, a monster that will serve you, but it only has 6 hit points or less. So yeah, that's great. And he's strong. He's got all this stuff, but anybody's taking that thing out with 1 hit. And so what are you going to do? Or you take the chance to summon something powerful and you hope that you'll roll well enough so that it'll stick around and serve you. Well, then it turns on you, dominates you, and now it's killing your party, and there's nothing you can do about it. So it's a lot of fun, and it definitely injects a lot of that weirdness that I think, they imply through things like the cover and things like those middle pictures that definitely present a weirder, stranger, edgier, whatever, more adult sort of setting than actually comes in the rules. And I'm actually happy for that, because I've read some of the setting materials. I have a few of the books. I like them for inspiration. They often have useful information in there, and mechanics and tables and things that I can pull from. I have not been tempted so far to run a Lamentations setting or campaign, but I have enjoyed the rules. And I think if you were looking at a way to get sort of some basic expert rules, but maybe you wanted a slightly different spin on them, maybe you wanted something that opened up a different era of sort of fantasy, medieval times, and you wanted something that was kind of written concisely and had everything you needed for the players. Just one last caveat: remember, nothing for the GM is basically in here. It's all for the players. I think it's definitely a very solid book. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you liked it, please hit the like button. If you feel like subscribing to see more of these, please subscribe. Other than that, I will talk to you later.